So today, we're diving into a topic that's been making waves in global economics, the U.S. China tariff war, and the recent deal that's brought some calm to the storm. If you've been following the news, you know that this trade conflict has been a roller coaster, with tariffs shooting up, markets freaking out, and both sides playing hardball. But a deal was just struck, and it's worth unpacking what is actually going on. Let's talk about it. 大家好，我是 Sir Ant 在中国. Hey everyone, it's Sir Ant in China. How y'all doing today? I hope you're having a lovely day. I'm having a fantastic day over here in China as usual, and it's getting better all the time thanks to great viewers like you who are remembering to help me out by hitting that subscribe button and throwing me a thumbs up if you like the content. It really does help the channel to grow, and I've got lots of new content coming over on my other channel. You really should go check it out. The link is in the description. But for now, let's get to today's topic. First, let's set the stage. The US and China are the world's two biggest economies. Their trade relationship is massive. We're talking $500 billion in goods flowing back and forth between those two countries alone. But for years, there's been tension. The US has long complained about its trade deficit with China, which hit $375 billion in 2017. That's a lot of made in China stuff coming in compared to what the US sends back. Then there's the issues of intellectual property theft, market access, and more recently concerns about fentanyl precursors coming in from China. On the flip side, China's got its own gripes, like US export controls on tech and sanctions on Chinese companies. This isn't just about economics, it's geopolitical chess. Enter Donald Trump in his second term. Tariffs have always been his go-to move. Back in the 1980s, he was already saying that the US was getting ripped off bigly by trading partners. In 2018, during his first term, he kicked off a trade war by slapping tariffs on $50 billion worth of Chinese goods, targeting tech-heavy products. China hit back with its own levies, and it was game on. Fast forward to 2025, and Trump cranked things up to 11. On April 2nd, dubbed Liberation Day by his administration, he imposed tariffs as high as 145% on Chinese imports. China retaliated with 125% duties on US goods. And suddenly, shipping containers weren't crossing the Pacific as freely anymore. Markets tanked, consumers braced for higher prices, and the world economy felt the tremors. So what changed? Why did both sides suddenly agree to slash these tariffs this month? Well, the deal, announced after talks in Geneva, brought US tariffs down to 30% and Chinese tariffs down to 10% for a 90-day pause. That's a huge de-escalation, but it didn't happen out of nowhere. Let's walk through the key factors that pushed this deal forward, starting with the big one: economic pain. Both the US and China were hurting, and not just a little. In the US, those sky-high tariffs meant higher prices for everything, from electronics to clothing. Analysts from Yale estimated that the tariffs could cost American households $2,800 a year in purchasing power. That's real money, especially when inflation was already creeping up to 6.7%, the highest since 1981. Businesses were struggling too. Importers were burning through inventories they'd stockpiled before the tariffs hit, and uncertainty was killing their ability to plan for the future. Meanwhile, Trump's advisors were whispering in his ear about the 2026 midterms. Economic pain does not win votes. And China wasn't exactly chilling either. Its economy, already wobbly from a post-COVID slump and a real estate crisis, took a hit from the tariffs as well. Export orders were drying up, and industries like electronics and apparel, which rely heavily on the US market, were staring at razor thin margins or outright losses. Some estimates suggested China's exports to the US could drop by half, potentially triggering millions of job losses and a wave of bankruptcies. Plus, China's GDP growth in late 2024 was the slowest in nearly 30 years. The People's Bank of China was slashing interest rates and pumping cash into the system to keep things afloat. Both sides were feeling the heat, and it was clear these tariffs were simply not sustainable. But economics wasn't the only driver. Diplomacy played a huge role, and Switzerland, wonderfully neutral and discreet Switzerland, was the perfect stage. The Geneva talks, led by U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng, were the first face-to-face meeting since the tariff war reignited. The Swiss president even joked about hoping the Holy Spirit would nudge things along. The fact that both sides showed up was a signal they wanted an off-ramp. China's foreign ministry had been saying for weeks that it was open to talks, but only if the US stopped bullying. The US, meanwhile, was under pressure to stabilize markets before the damage got worse. Geneva gave them a chance to hit reset without either side looking like they blinked first. Now let's talk about the bigger picture: global pressure. The tariff war wasn't just a US China thing. It was stressing out the entire planet. Europe was worried about Chinese goods flooding their markets if the US became too expensive. The EU even set up an import surveillance task force to watch for dumping. Japan, South Korea, and Southeast Asian countries were nervous about getting caught in the crossfire. The International Chamber of Commerce called the deal a clear signal that both countries wanted to avoid a hard decoupling. Stock markets rallied hard when the deal was announced. The S&P 500 jumped 3.2%, and shipping companies like Maersk saw shares soar 12%. Everyone was rooting for this truce, and that global chorus probably nudged both sides to the table. But here's where it gets interesting. Neither side gave up that much. The deal is temporary, and the tariffs aren't gone. They're just lower for now. The US kept its 10% baseline tariff on all imports and the 20% fentanyl related tariff. China didn't commit to buying more US goods, unlike the 2020 Phase 1 deal, where it promised $200 billion in purchases and fell short. Both sides agreed to keep talking, maybe using that old deal as a starting point, but there's no guarantee they'll land on a permanent fix. It's like they've paused the boxing match, but nobody's thrown in the towel. So, what accelerated this deal? It boils down to a mix of self-interest and pragmatism. The US saw rising consumer prices, jittery markets, and political risks. China faced export crashes, job losses, and a slowing economy. Both knew a full-on trade war could trigger a global recession. Diplomacy in Geneva gave them a face-saving way to de-escalate, and the world's watchful eyes added pressure to play nice. But don't get too cozy. This is a truce, not a victory. What's next? The 90-day clock is ticking, and talks will continue in the US, China, or maybe another neutral spot. The US wants China to open its markets more and crack down on fentanyl. China wants the US to ease tech restrictions and drop the currency manipulator label, which the IMF says doesn't even hold water. Both sides are dug in, and renowned analysts are saying a quick resolution is, sadly, unlikely. This trade war has been simmering for decades, and those non-tariff barriers Bessent mentioned, they've been building for 40 years. This is a marathon, not a sprint. This deal shows how interconnected the US and China really are, for better or worse. Completely decoupling is a pipe dream. China is the world's factory, and the US is its biggest customer. But the tariff war also shows how fast trust can erode. Xi is pushing for self reliance, buying soybeans from Brazil, and boosting domestic tech like DeepSeek's AI models. The US is tightening export controls and cozying up to allies like Japan and South Korea. The deal buys time, but the underlying tensions, economic, political, and even cultural, aren't going anywhere. All in all, it's a messy, high stakes game. But for now, cooler heads have prevailed. So, what do you think? Will this truce hold? Or are we just kicking the can down the road? Drop your thoughts down in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Thanks as always for joining me today, and we will see you in the next video. 再见。